Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jessica Paine. I'm the Director of Community Programs at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. And I want to welcome you all to our very first Reach Out Live. For those of you who are familiar with the Reach Out program, our full name is Reach Out Legal Assistance for Nonprofits, and it is one of the community programs of the Bar Association. We've been in place since 2012, and our mission is to help nonprofit leaders and the attorneys who advise them learn more about legal issues of vital importance to the running of a nonprofit. Normally, the way that we do this is we conduct a series of seminars throughout the year, usually quarterly seminars, in which we offer free CLE for volunteer attorneys, but we also offer free attendance for the nonprofit leaders who would like to come and learn from these educational seminars, followed by a brief advice clinic where they can sit down with attorneys one-on-one. Obviously, with the situation that we are facing today with the pandemic of COVID-19, these in-person meetings are not something that we can continue thus far this year, but we very much wanted to continue to bring Reach Out's mission to nonprofits and volunteer attorneys and make sure that we're still helping the community as much as we can. So with that in mind, our wonderful team of the people on our oversight committee for the Reach Out group volunteered. We are planning to do at least 3 of these monthly Reach Out Live. We will keep you updated with the dates, but we are looking at the first Tuesday of the month, this month, May, and in June, in which our wonderful panelists and hopefully some guest speakers to be mentioned later will join us. We have a list of topics that hopefully you all saw when you signed up online and registered. But we really want this to be a chat and a conversation between our speakers here today and you. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, please do use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit those. We'll be monitoring on Facebook and through email as well, but the Q&A really is the easiest way to make sure that you get us our questions. Our speakers will go through and touch on very briefly those topics that we talked about, but please feel free at any time to jump in with a question. So with that, I would love to introduce our panel of speakers, starting with who's appearing on my top left of the screen. I don't know how it looks on yours, but our intrepid Jaclyn Vary, who has been a member of the Reach Out Oversight Committee for many years and is also a volunteer with our Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. Jackie is an attorney with Calfee, Halter, and Griswold. Jackie, I don't know if you want to say hello and say what your topics of expertise are at your firm before we move on to our next speaker.
Yes, so I am primarily an estate planning attorney, but I do probably 20% nonprofit work for a lot of private foundations. So a lot of uncertainty during this time about individuals' estate plans and wills, but also charitable giving. So that's my purpose here today.
Great. I also want to mention Jennifer Leslie Fleming, another longtime member of this committee and representative from the Federal Bar Association, one of our partners for the Reach Out program. And she is with Madisar Jacobs. And Jennifer, would you like to say hello?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm glad you could all attend here, at least via Zoom. Yeah, I'm with Madisar Jacobs. I do business litigation, so I handle any type of dispute for a business. And I also have represented and been involved in a number of boards. I was the former board chair for the Children's Museum of Cleveland, for example. So I think I have some practical experience, and I know a lot of the other panelists here today have more of the nonprofit law expertise. So, but welcome everybody.
Thank you. And then next, our wonderful Alex Campbell of Buckingham, Doolittle, and Burroughs. He is one of our newer members of the committee, but has been very active. If you've come to our seminars, I'm sure you've seen him speak as well as the others on our panel. Alex?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us in this unorthodox but hopefully helpful presentation. And as Jess mentioned, I'm a partner at Buckingham Doolittle, head of our nonprofit group. My practice is primarily focused on serving nonprofit organizations, serve as outside general counsel with focus on corporate and tax, and then also represent a number of social entrepreneurs and individual philanthropists.
Great, thanks, Alex. And the last but not least, of course, Justin Stevenson, one of our newer members of the panel. Justin comes to us from Bauer Stevenson. And Justin, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I'm with Bauer Stevenson, we do business advising, real estate advising, and some litigation as well for very small and medium-sized businesses in the communities, which includes a few nonprofits. So, just happy to be here to help in this weird time that we're experiencing.
Right. So speaking of the weird time that we're experiencing, I know the question on the top of everybody's mind, the most recent thing that affects nonprofits and small businesses is the CARES Act. And if any of our panelists would like to sort of kick us off, give us the overview and give us what nonprofits need to know about what's happening.
So I'd be happy to give a brief overview as it relates to nonprofits. So this is the CARES Act, which was passed just over a week ago, feels like several months ago now, expanded a program under the SBA that has been in existence for some time, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and also created a new program called the Payroll Protection Program. And the Payroll Protection Program is the one you've probably heard the most about. It has the potential to have a forgivable loan if you maintain your payroll through June 30th, or if you rehire people that you furloughed, or increase salaries that you've decreased during this time. And for the first time, most of the time, SBA funds are limited to small businesses, not available to nonprofits, but the CARES Act made some changes in that area so nonprofits are able to access both of these programs. There's other programs as well under the CARES Act, including employee retention, tax credits, and other things that we won't get into all the details today. But the Payroll Protection Program, again, which is the one that we've seen the most action on over the last week or so, if you are a nonprofit organization, 501c3 specifically, organization that has 500 or fewer employees, you can essentially ask for, through your lender, through your traditional lender, not directly to the SBA, you can ask for a loan of up to 250% of your essentially average monthly payroll costs. So compensation, taxes, employee benefits that you're paying. And there's lots of nuance if you haven't been around, or if you're a seasonal employer, or things like that. But again, essentially it is 250% of your monthly payroll costs. And if you maintain your payroll, or if you rehire people by the end of June, that amount of money, presuming that you use at least 75% of that money on payroll costs, will be fully forgivable. If it isn't fully forgivable, maybe some of it's forgivable, some of it's not, maybe none of it's forgivable, the interest rate is fixed at 1%. So it's very cheap money, cheaper than is available really in any other context. And the one thing that I will say, again, this program has been live for all of maybe 2 or 3 days. It officially went live on Friday. None of the banks were really ready on Friday, so I understand a lot of our clients were applying over the weekend and yesterday. There's $349 billion in the program, and that money is going to go very fast. So if this potentially applies to your organization, you should be having a conversation with your banker as soon as possible, because $350 billion sounds like a lot until I heard, just anecdotally, I heard that Bank of America, just that one bank, yesterday got applications totaling about $35 billion. So about 10% of the program just yesterday. So it's an exciting program. There's possibility that a fourth stimulus package will come out, which will increase the pot of money. But that pot of money right now, as it currently stands, is dwindling fast.
Great. Would anybody else like to join in from our panel? Anything else to add to what Alex has said?
Well, this is Jennifer Fleming. I can add something. I know that nonprofits often have a question too about how employees or persons they work with are classified. Sometimes they question whether somebody is really an employee or is somebody an independent contractor. And my understanding is that under the payroll protection piece of this, under that portion, you cannot include any expenses that you pay to independent contractors.
That's correct.
Right. So, but those independent contractors, to the extent that you know, you as the nonprofit work with independent contractors and have a good relationship with them, you definitely do want to at least tell them, if they don't know, that they can themselves apply potentially to get a loan. And if they are self-employed, for example, those independent contractors can apply just like any business would, to get a loan for their payroll expenses, which would, if they're a sole employee, that would be their own payroll to themselves, among other expenses if they have them. So again, the nonprofit itself cannot include those independent contractor costs, but those independent contractors can themselves seek a loan to the extent they need to do that.
Great, that's a
Right.
really good point. Oh, sorry, Jackie, please.
I'll piggyback off of that, just saying that when you're looking at funding too, realize that when you have your nonprofit, your annual giving is probably going to decrease unless you're in one of these direct service impact areas related to COVID-19. I've seen that in a lot of our nonprofits that we counsel right now, seeing a significant drop off in funding and revenue. Your programs aren't running, you're not able to do that. So if you can look at this CARES Act as another source of at least immediate liquidity into your organization, that's definitely helpful. Carrying forward payroll, it's, you know, being able to continue and restart all of your programs once we get through this. That's part of this process of kind of continuing on. But what do we do past when we're trying to start up organizations again? Or what are you doing right now?
Well, I think that's a really good jumping off point for one of our other topics that we wanted to talk about. So, you know, Jackie, like you're saying, you know, we're going to see a lot of the giving to nonprofits unfortunately dip as people are starting to hurt themselves. So in terms of funding, what else can you do beyond the CARES Act? I know we've talked about the possibility of dipping into your endowments. Does anyone want to say anything about that?
Well, I'll start off with saying that the IRS has, there's been a above the line deduction for individual donors who don't itemize their tax returns. It's $300. So that's kind of a stimulus to nonprofits and giving to charitable organizations. So maybe you can try and reach other donors and try and get a lot of smaller donations. But also when you look at dipping into your endowment, you really have to look at, is this a generalized endowment, or is this something specific that has a restricted purpose? Because if there is a restricted purpose, you have to look to see if you need to actually file something in court to get this restriction released. A lot of donors, when you create maybe an endowed chair or something else at a university or other institution, this endowed chair has a specific purpose. Or if you're giving and you're giving to a particular organization for their building fund, there is a particular purpose. And if you're trying to redirect funds away, the Ohio Attorney General has a vested interest to protect, you know, the charitable organization and these donors, and they're going to require a filing generally, or you'd have to look at the particular document setting up this donor agreement to see what the restrictions are, if you can actually release these restrictions on a charitable gift directed either to, like I said, a professorship or a building endowment or any other restriction that you have.
Unless anyone has something that they want to immediately add on to that, we can go back to that topic, but we did get a question. If we could go back to the CARES Act briefly. We did get a question, are the last 2 payroll cycles forgivable under this act, or does it start after we receive it? It's from a nonprofit. They are about to pay payroll today, and they were wondering if they should try to wait a week until they get accepted to get it covered.
So the payroll, the payroll itself is not forgivable. It is the loan amount that will be forgivable. And there's no reason to wait, because the amount that you get under the program is forgivable to the extent that you use it for payroll costs. So you look at your payroll costs from 2019 to determine how much you can ask for. Then you don't have to ask for the whole amount, but that's the maximum you can ask for. And then you get the money. And I don't really have a good sense right now for how quickly the lenders are actually issuing. Again, I'm hearing most of the lenders just started accepting applications yesterday. So say you apply tomorrow, you get the money, your loan closes next week, and you get your money sometime soon thereafter. Then you'll have an 8-week period between the time you get the money and June 30th to determine, to use the money, to apply the money that you get. And if you apply it to payroll costs, then there'll be some process for asking for that money to be forgiven. That process has not been really well defined just yet. The SBA has said that additional regulations will be issued on the forgiveness piece, but the order is you apply for the loan, you get the money, you use the money, then you ask for it to be forgiven.
Great, thanks for that clarification. Does anyone else want to add on to that? Okay, just to make sure that we are closing out well, does anyone else have any thoughts as we talk about funding for nonprofits? Because obviously funding and keeping the mission going is weighing heavily on everybody's mind.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to Jackie's comments about the endowment, I literally, just before I jumped on this call, was on another call with a client regarding tapping into endowments, and that I've gotten several of those calls over the last week, and I think that's only going to increase as our nonprofit organizations that we serve on the boards of, and we served as attorneys for, are going to be looking for any way to make up for lost revenue, especially the kinds of organizations that only get paid for services delivered. So whether that's loans or rapid response funds from places like the Cleveland Foundation, or tapping into endowments, I think that organizations have to be creative. And of course, if you have questions about your ability to access certain funds, an attorney who serves on your board or an attorney who serves your organization can help with that. But maybe this PPP program is not going to be the panacea everybody wants it to be, because that money's going to run out fast. So it's smart to think about other things like an endowment.
We got a follow-up question to our earlier question about what specifically to do with these immediate needs for payroll. So from the same questioner, they've said that they have 4 employees on February 15th, but one of them was in the process of leaving and was only putting in 1 day per month during that time. They said that they have officially let him go early March. And then they'd like to know, do they need to have 3 or 4 people on payroll by June 30th in order for that to be forgivable? Or how long do they need to keep that 4th person after June 30th? If that's something that we can answer.
So it's not, so the question is essentially somebody was leaving anyway, and whether that person should be retained or rehired in order to get the forgiveness. So my general advice, it's not clear, first of all, and my general advice on this question, because we've gotten it sort of different manifestations of this question a couple different ways, is ultimately this has to be a business decision. So I wouldn't bring somebody back who is leaving just so you can get the money forgiven, because that doesn't make a lot of sense in the long run. So again, the money's cheap, so it's 1% interest. So even if the money is not fully forgivable, that you may decide that we'll get some of it forgiven, some of it will be, and it's also deferred before you have to, I think it's 6 months before you have to make the first payment. So if that money will help, I wouldn't necessarily bring the person back just so you can get it forgiven. But you have to kind of work through the different options. And I would say that let your business needs drive the discussion rather than the forgivability piece. If the forgivability piece, if the plan is you're going to furlough people for 2 months and hopefully everything is going to be back up and running in 2 months, great, maybe that works just fine. But a lot of our clients are very concerned that 2 months from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, things still aren't going to be totally back to normal. It's not going to be full steam ahead. And so there has to be a question, should we be bringing everybody back on June 30th, knowing that we still might not have any work for them to do for the rest of the summer? So it's a little bit more nuanced than just what number did you have on this day, what number do you have on that day?
I think that leads us well into another one of our topics. It's sort of a broad one, but there's a lot to say under it. Any other employment issues that our nonprofits should keep in mind during these times? Anything else?
Yeah, this is Alex. I mean, there's the employment issues are, so I'm not, and I will confess to not being a labor and employment lawyer, so I'm not going to go into a lot of the technical details on the various rules that have come into play. And there's a number, including new rules regarding sick leave and FMLA and things like that. Unemployment, is another one. The one thing I will mention with respect, and so I would strongly advise, if you have any employment questions, to find somebody who is an employment law attorney to be able to help you through those issues. The one thing I will mention, because we've had this back to the question about the business decision about what to do here, we have found that actually for a number of our clients, with the boost to the unemployment amount, essentially what they're calling the, well, you get an extra $600 basically in your unemployment amount, part of the CARES Act. For actually a number of our clients' employees, it's actually better for them to stay on unemployment during this time, because they're financially better off doing so. And so again, that goes into the discussion about, do you bring them back just so you can get the loan forgiven, when it's actually better for them to stay on unemployment during this time? And especially if you're not doing any work, you have to have that discussion, and you also have to think about how much would we ask for? Should we ask for a little bit less if we know it's going to be a loan? And I know it's complicated. I know there's a million things happening at once. And I also want to reiterate that you have to make these decisions very quickly, because the program is it's dwindling. But I wouldn't advise any organization, small or large, to just apply for the full amount and then hope to figure it out later, because then you might find yourself saddled with more debt. And as our organizations need to be streamlined and cash sensitive over the next several months to year or so, at best, I think it's important that you think it through.
I would also add just a couple of pieces on the kind of employment issues to consider, and particularly in light of the fact that everybody's working from home or working away from the office now. I mean, full disclosure, I am not the employment law expert either. My partner in the firm actually is the guy who handles most of this, but so we can direct questions to him directly if there's any specific issues we need. But some of the things we've been dealing with a lot are making sure that the organization's policies and procedures are clearly expressed to their employees, and particularly with respect to employees that you have who are working hourly, that you explain to them when they can and cannot work. And you don't want to get yourself in a situation where all of a sudden your employee's working from home, they've worked 80 hours a week, they're an hourly non-exempt employee, and all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of money that you have to pay to them. I'm not sure if that, maybe that doesn't apply to a lot of people here, but still a very much a consideration that you want to make sure you're protecting yourself for. We've dealt with some other clients asking us questions about having specific infectious disease type policies, explaining to employees what they should and should not be doing if they encounter some symptoms of the illness, because we have some clients who continue to operate as essential businesses, and it's important that all of these kind of policies and procedures are laid out. And the important part is having it clearly communicated to your employee, so when an an issue arises, there's no questions as to how people are supposed to handle it. So making sure a lot of these policies and procedures are in place, particularly where you never had to deal with these issues before, like continuing to operate in the face of a pandemic, or having employees work from home where they normally don't. You want to make sure that these things are spelled out, and at the very least you've thought through them.
To piggyback off of Justin, what I'd say is also the privacy concerns. If you are in a field where you actually have sensitive information on some of your constituents, and you're working from home on a personal laptop, there are other data privacy concerns. If you have Google Home, where they might be listening in to some conversations, and also even with your employees on that infectious disease policy, or if you're having some essential employees still come into work to maintain business continuity and function, would you, are you having screening procedures even to get in? I do know some of the other nursing homes, and because of the elder care that we do here, they have screening for employees, the temperature reads before they can even come in. Also, disclosure requirements. If an employee does contract COVID-19, are you then disclosing some sensitive and healthcare protected information? You really need to be aware that you're not over disclosing something where you could possibly identify who this particular individual is. That's a violation of HIPAA.
Right, and I would just as well, I was just about to say a similar thing, Jackie. It's so important because, you know, you may have had procedures in place before all this where you had, for example, donor information, maybe you had credit card information all in one location. And now with everybody trying to work remotely, you know, maybe there's pieces and parts of that in different locations. And, you know, although there's a lot going on, you know, the nonprofits still need to be mindful of protecting the privacy and the confidentiality of all that information.
Right. Can anyone think of anything else as we're talking about planning for the future, you know, putting these procedures into place? I know one of the things that we had mentioned that nonprofits are want to think about is business continuity. Is there anything else that we want to add for nonprofits to keep in mind as we move forward?
If they're one of the lucky few that actually had some insurance in place, I know a lot of the smaller nonprofits don't necessarily have a general liability protection or anything like that. You may want to look at some of your insurance policies to see if there is any coverage there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one thing I would also mention with respect to business continuity and organizational continuity is the board and staff, whether it's a small organization, maybe it's an organization that doesn't even have any staff, the board should be really all hands on deck during this time, and the board should be meeting, again, not face to face, but whether it's Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever, just a old school conference call. The board should be communicating regularly. The board chair, if you do have staff, the board chair or other delegated person on the board should be communicating on an almost daily basis with the chief executive at the organization. Again, if you have an organization that has staff, because things are moving so quickly and things are changing very quickly, and you need to be able to react both to the immediate kinds of changes, but also keep the long view in mind. Every organization, regardless of the type of organization, exists it is created to exist essentially in perpetuity. So the organization has to figure out a way to get through this. And I recognize how that's so much easier said than done, given we don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. But it is important that the organization not stick its head in the sand, and the board, that really is a board question ultimately, that the board is engaged in this process, regularly discussing things that maybe the board wouldn't even ordinarily get involved in. Like you wouldn't normally have daily communications with your executive director, but this is not a normal time. So it's important that the organization have those kinds of discussions. And I think it's important that you have conversations about budgets, that you have conversations about changing priorities, that you have conversations about what's the plan for the next week, what's the plan for the next month, what's the plan for the next 6 months, and having the ability to be organized and but also a little bit flexible, and again, just be engaged in the process is super important. And I think an organization is not going to have any kind of continuity if the board isn't, if you keep to your normal board schedule and you say, well, we're not meeting for another 3 weeks, or we're not scheduled to meet until next month. I think that so much can happen between now and then that it would be a mistake not to call a special meeting.
Can I jump in on some of the filings that haven't been delayed here? The IRS has not delayed any 990 filings. A lot of the individual personal income tax return filings have been delayed. But as of right now, there has been no notifications or special notices from the IRS saying that any 990s, so 990 PFs, 990Ns, all of those are still due. So if you had a fiscal year end or you're a calendar year end taxpayer or filer, you're still going to have a 990 filed by May 15th. So that's pretty much my first tax filing deadline right now. But also the Secretary, the Ohio Attorney General charitable registration filings, on their website today, only the fiscal year ending May 2019, which would have been due April 1st, is extended to June 1st. So the Ohio Attorney General is not extending charitable registration filings also. So it's something to be aware of, that you still need to file in this time so that you can continue to operate in compliance with the law.
Yeah, that's a good example of the kind of thing where you need to pay close attention, because we have a bunch of deadlines that haven't been moved, and we have a bunch of deadlines that have been moved, and we had to file a reinstatement application for a client that lost its tax exemption, and we had to file it, and we had to file it to essentially an empty office and chase down somebody to get it so that we could get a confirmation of filing at the IRS down in Cincinnati. So it's a mess, but you have to be, I think the safe approach is to assume the deadlines that normally apply will continue to apply until you see specifically that deadline has been moved. So don't just assume that, well, the IRS moved the tax filing deadline for individuals, so let's just assume everything's going to move, because that's not a safe approach. And who knows? I would much rather do it right now than do it wrong and ask for leniency later.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like in these uncertain times, it pays to plan ahead and over plan and not count on any of these things to save us. Speaking of planning ahead and trying to look at deadlines, I would love to talk a little bit about some contract issues. I know one of the terms that has been tossed around a lot is the force majeure, these unforeseeable circumstances. What are some pitfalls that nonprofits should look out for, and how do you find your way around this minefield? Any thoughts on contract issues, anything that nonprofits need to keep in mind?
I think the first thing, this is Alex, I think the first thing you look at is look at the actual contract and see what it says, whether it even has a force majeure clause and or an act of God clause or whatever other provision where performance is where performance is not required, or timely performance is not required. And it's a question of, and you also, the other thing to think about, so again, look at the contract, look at what it actually says, talk to your lawyer about what it actually says, talk to your lawyer about what your options are. The other thing to think about, depending on the nature of the contract, you may be also able to speak with your contracting partner and say, can we amend this contract? Can we amend the deadline for performance? That may be easier said than done, again, than in depending on whether it's like a government contract or a government grant. But it behooves you to actually look at the contract, and again, not assume that, well, I know we have this contract, but there's a pandemic, so let's just assume that nobody's going to expect us to do it, because then, heaven forbid, you find yourself slapped with a breach of contract lawsuit to add on to all the other challenges that our clients are facing.
Yeah, and I would just add, I agree with everything Alex just said, and that is, you don't want to have to rely on litigation down the road to determine whether something really constituted force majeure or not. So, this is a time for, trying to, like Alex said, come up with practical solutions. And, I think even with the most difficult of opposing counsel that I've had, and I'm working with right now, they all seem to be on the same page here with respect to, boy, we're really in an unusual situation. So for example, we had a matter that was just, teeing up to litigation. We entered into a tolling agreement so that all of the statute of limitations, all of the timing requirements would be stayed, so that the parties could try to first of all, have some time. I think we gave ourselves at least 2 months to try to, figure out things before, either party had to go ahead and take the next step in the dispute process. So there's certainly ways to protect yourself in the interim, and, try to figure out those practical solutions before you have to go ahead and again, rely on a contract provision that may or may not be enforceable, that may be construed in a very narrow way, perhaps by a court down the road.
Yeah, and I would just like to, excuse me, add that, now is the time to start having these conversations, if there are conversations to be had, and that, as with a lot of these other issues, communicating openly with all of the parties who have, all the stakeholders to these issues now, instead of waiting and hoping that they just ignore you when you don't pay or something like that, is communicating now is going to help you a lot in the long run, and probably help your bottom line a lot in the long run when you're not having to pay lawyers to fight over it for years to come.
Yeah, speaking of, doing a little bit now to sort of protect yourself in the long run, I would love to go back and explore a little bit more thoroughly. We touched very briefly on issues regarding insurance, but I know it's a bigger topic, and I wonder if any of our panelists have anything more to say about making sure that you have coverage, anything about change operations, anything else that nonprofits should be thinking about regarding insurance.
Yeah, so I'll kind of jump in and give my initial thoughts, and of course anyone else can add to it. But the big thing with insurance now is making sure that your coverage, as it was written previously, covers your operations now. One of the big things that we've been talking about with some of our clients is, and this might not necessarily apply to a lot of the nonprofits that are involved here, but certainly is a good illustration of the problem, is that a lot of restaurants in the Cleveland area are now operating on a sort of delivery model, where they were never doing anything like that before. The guys down the street have their employees just driving out in their individual cars to deliver food that folks in the neighborhood have ordered. And it's great that people are able to be flexible and able to find this ability to continue to operate when they're told that they have to physically close their locations. But for those employees who are driving around particularly if they never had people doing deliveries in the first place, they're probably not covered if they get into an accident or it hurt someone else or someone else's property when they're driving these deliveries around. Even if they had delivery drivers before, potentially, depending on how the coverage was written, it might not cover the commercial auto policy might not cover employees' own automobiles, for example. It might only cover the particular companies or the particular nonprofits owned automobiles owned by that particular company or nonprofit. So that was a great time to go back and talk to your insurance brokers. Usually these guys aren't charging you by the hour, so it's an easy conversation to have, right? You pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, even if you're not doing delivery services, to say, hey, under my employment, my EPL policy, my employment liability policy, or under my cyber insurance policy, now that my employees are working from home, is there anything that I need to do to notify my insurer about these changes in circumstances, or notify or reapply for a different type of coverage because people are no longer operating at our location, they're operating away and at home. For a lot of the cyber and commercial general type of insurance, you're probably not going to run into those issues as much as you would in the case of the delivery services. But it's still a great idea to talk to the people that help you write these policies to make sure that there's nothing that anyone needs to know or no endorsements that need to be added because of these changes.
Great. Unless someone else has something else to add, Justin, you brought up a great point, and one of our other topics, something that is relatively new to this brave new world of Zoom meetings and virtual meetings, everything to a new wrinkle in cyber attacks and cybersecurity. I know that a number of groups have seen attacks posing as resources in the COVID-19 situation, and I wonder if there's anything the nonprofits particularly need to watch out for in terms of keeping themselves safe.
I would say there was a prior Reach Out presentation, and those are all on the Reach Out website on cyber insurance and data privacy. So it might be worthwhile to look back at that. One of my partners, Jamie Ramsey, was speaking at that event. But to phishing attacks and also guarding your own name, there are going to be people hijacking your nonprofit's good name to basically try and fish for your donors to get credit card information and to basically start posing as yourself. It's worthwhile to go out and look to see if there's anything on the web that's remotely similar to you. I do know a lot has been talked about the Cleveland Foundation's Rapid Response Fund, but there might be some opportunistic cyber hacker who'd be posing like, donate here through us for this Rapid Response Fund. And so really looking back at your own entity's communication and branding and guarding your name, because that's what you're going to have at the end of this, the reputation of your nonprofit.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with Jackie, and I would add that this, cybersecurity and privacy sort of area is very much intertwined with a lot of the other issues that we've discussed, right? Like your employment policies and making sure that your policies and procedures explain to your employees the ways in which that they should be keeping themselves safe. And this is important in 2020 generally, but even more so important now when you have employees who are working from home. You want to make sure in your employment policies you're explaining to them both what good practices are in keeping your organization's information safe, and also what the practices are that they have to follow, so that that they know what their actual obligations are with respect to maintaining passwords and maintaining multiple factor authentication on any systems that allow for it, and making sure that they only keep if you have your organization owns the systems that they're working on, making sure they keep all that information on there and they're not taking it home to their personal computers, and they're not using their personal computers to access your organization's systems. A lot of policies and procedures like that will go a long way in helping you keep your data safe and communicating to the employees how they can help you do that. And then, of course, making sure that you have adequate cyber insurance is important now. I think, along with a malpractice and policy, if you're a service organization or a commercial general policy, everyone should probably also have cyber insurance at this point, because there is so much of everyone's organization that's stored in the cloud or stored in various digital formats, and it's just almost that inevitable. So that, and making sure that when you receive emails asking for important information, that you double and triple check so that excuse me, so who exactly it's coming from. You're making sure that if it looks like it's from the CEO of your organization, it actually is, and that it's not an email pretending to be from the CEO with a couple of letters changed or something like that. If it's asking for money, you're calling to make sure and confirm that the person is actually asking you to send them money, and it's not just somebody out there in the world trying to pretend to be that person.
Great. I'd love to switch gears a little bit here and talk about some of the corporate formalities that nonprofits need to think about. I know for the Bar Association, we were very sad to have to postpone our annual meeting, not cancel, postpone, and sort of re-envision what that's going to look like. And we're very excited for moving forward on that. But I know that that is something that a lot of nonprofits are going to have to deal with. Do we have any words of advice for our nonprofits on what to do with those particular corporate formalities? Anything else they need to think of?
So I would just reiterate what I said earlier, which is that if you have a annual meeting requirement, that annual meeting requirement's not going anywhere. It may be a different format, and under Ohio's nonprofit law, electronic meetings where everyone can communicate contemporaneously is, which means everyone can hear each other at the same time. Email meetings are not meetings. Have a real live meeting for your annual meeting and any other board meetings, any other official board meetings. Make sure you continue to keep minutes just like you normally would. And again, what I said earlier is assume the deadlines, assume the requirements are in place unless you hear explicitly otherwise. And you may do what the CMBA did with your annual meeting and move it. That's generally acceptable, even if it's fixed every first Monday in May every year, typically, but the board can change that. But you still have to have the meeting. And so it's, and again, just generally, corporate formalities should continue to be adhered to, even if it's a slightly modified version of the meeting. Continue to keep your minutes, continue to have your meetings, continue to do what you're doing, continue to do what you were doing to the extent that you can. And if you need to change anything, if you need to change signature requirements, or if you need to change the threshold of how much somebody can cut a check over a certain amount of money, how many signatures you need on a check or something like that, think about that if that's something that you need to be able to continue to operate during this time. But the takeaway for today is that this doesn't just change everything automatically. If your organization needs to change it, it should take steps to make that change for your organization.
Great. Anything else to add from any of our other panelists? Okay.
I just want to double and reiterate that the email meetings are not meetings. It'd be a written action, which would require all directors to sign off on a written action unanimously. So I've gotten that question 1,000 times from nonprofits. Can we just do this by email? And the answer is almost always no, unless everybody's agreeing. And typically you want that to always follow the same motion practice that you have in the past. Somebody's proposing a motion for ratification by the full board. So as Alex said, it's very simple to have a conference call with all of your directors, so that should happen.
Right, exactly. So at this point, we've gone through most of our list of topics that we wanted to bring up. I want to definitely, of course, encourage anybody watching again to go ahead and submit questions via that Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to open up to our panelists if there were any parts of the topics that you feel that you have more that you want to add, any particular words of more advice to nonprofits as they occur to you as you've seen in these past couple of weeks.
So I want to make sure if we do get any questions, feel free to ask those questions, Jess. But the one other thing I would mention, and I think Justin alluded to it earlier, we do have a number of nonprofit organizations that are deemed essential businesses during this time. And the governor's order as written is that essential businesses are encouraged to stay open, but make sure that you maintain safe social distancing practices, make sure that you maintain all of the necessary health protocols to be able to do so. And if you have any questions about whether your business or nonprofit is in fact a essential business, because the essential business definition is pretty vague, to be fair, it's pretty vague, and so we have there have been some stories. We have some clients that have gotten calls from the health department saying we don't think you're an essential business, so you have to shut down. So look into those rules, make sure that you are applying those rules fairly, and if you need to talk to an attorney about whether your business is in fact essential during this time. But that's the one other thing I just wanted to mention, because I know there's been a lot of confusion about that, and knowing this is at least going to last another month, there may be some organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, that are that want to maybe test the limits a little bit as this stretches on. And if your organization is essential, fine. If it's not essential, it's really important that you continue to follow the governor's order.
I'll speak a little bit toward additional funding. I know we had mentioned the Greater Cleveland Rapid Response Fund. So they're primarily focused on supporting nonprofits that are direct on the line, supporting homeless people, low-income residents, people of color. There's a whole list on the Cleveland Foundation, but they have raised a lot of money so far and have given grants out in the past 2 weeks. So it would be worthwhile to have an organization on the front lines, such as the Greater Cleveland Food Bank got an award, Domestic Violence Child Advocacy Centers, Spanish American Committee. These are just a few of the kind of entities. Behavioral health, that's a big issue right now, as people are having harder access to get to their doctors. Food and shelter. When you are one of those nonprofits, take a look at the Greater Cleveland COVID-19 Rapid Response Fund as another foundation, kind of just general grant you should be applying for.
One other thing I'll mention so we talked at the very beginning about the PPP and these other SBA funds, but another potential source of funds is if you're an organization that has a line of credit, an existing line of credit. Have a communication, maybe in the same conversation we were talking about the PPP with your lender. Talk about your line of credit. Talk about with your other organizational type partners, whether there can be any kind of advance. We have clients that are asking for advances. We have clients that are asking for essentially contracts to be paid where we're not actually delivering any services, and we'll make up for it later in the year. So there, again, creativity during this time is going to be necessary, and finding a way to ride this wave for as long as it goes is going to be critically important. In our nonprofits in the community, both on this call and in the general community. It's critically important that the organizations continue to exist when this is all said and done, because the needs that you serve, whether it's health or arts or education, are all going to continue to be there. In many cases, are going to be more acute than ever. So it's very important that we find ways for our nonprofits to be able to get through this.
Yeah, absolutely. With that in mind, for those of us participating on the webinar chat, I've put out several parts of the BAR website. There are so many good resources out there. As Jackie mentioned, the COVID-19 Response Fund locally. There's a lot of groups both in Cleveland, in Ohio, and nationally that are looking to hit or to help those groups that have been hardest hit, including nonprofits, of course. But other organizations where there's a lot of crossover and have been helped by the BAR programs like the Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. It just takes a lot of searching and looking. So we've been maintaining lists that will hopefully, keep being updated and will be of use to these various groups. So I strongly encourage you to go to the BAR's website. Our main page, clemetrobar.org, has a link to our COVID response. We have videos, we have similar to the ones that we're doing today for all sorts of different groups and information that we're constantly updating. We also have tinyurl.com/COVID public. That's an extensive list of resources, both locally and beyond, that we'd love for you to check out. And if you're looking to give back, tinyurl.com/COVID members. Has ways to donate your time and your funds, including helping with legal aid, helping with the food bank, a lot of different ways to give back. So we definitely encourage you to check that out. I know that we are running up towards the end of our time, and I would hate to cut any of our panelists off. Is there any other, anything that you'd like to add? I see you have one more question, so anything like to add, and I'll double check with our questions.
Just real quick, I wanted to add on the stay-at-home order discussion that was that Alex mentioned, that the governor's administration has essentially advised businesses, particularly if you think you're essential but you're not on the list, but also if you are essential and remain open, to create some sort of documentation, sort of a due diligence document, explaining why you think you are essential. I mean, if you're on the list, that's a pretty easy point to hit. But also what you continue to do, the steps you continue to take to keep your facilities and your operations clean and healthy while you continue to operate during this stay-at-home order. Just so that if you have that available and the Department of Health does contact you, then the conversation becomes a lot easier, and you're not scrambling to figure out what you need to do at that point.
Okay, if we have time, we did just get a question from one of our viewers. So to explain a little bit about their mission of the nonprofit. They're a small arts and youth development nonprofit who offers free summer hip hop camps, after school mentoring programs, and in-school arts integrated education. They say they also have an arm that focuses on workforce development for adults and youth, gain paid and unpaid internships to learn a variety of workforce skills. Most of the adults come from a partner organization's re-entry program for adults coming out of drug addiction, homelessness, and prison. Most of the youth come from at-risk neighborhoods. They say that this arm operates like an entrepreneurial hand-printed clothing line and screen print shop. So their question is, should they be worried that these two streams of income and the expenses associated with them could be viewed as non-mission income? They are worried that this crisis could allow their income from this arm to exceed 33% of their overall income. So I'm happy to repeat any of that question if it's not clear.
So the question is essentially whether there should be UBIT, unrelated business income, under the circumstances, and the test is it's more like 15%, not 33. But the reality is that it's probably going to be a pretty nuanced analysis, more nuanced than we have time for today, to determine whether the income from that is in fact, first of all, is it UBIT in the first place, regardless of the situation. It might be, so UBIT unrelated, it might be related business, in which case none of this really analysis really matters. But if it is unrelated, then we would look into the question of how does it relate to, or how does it compare to the total revenue of the organization? And I think it's a great question, because it's sort of a specific manifestation of the kinds of problems that we're going to have, where before it was perfectly fine. It was a nice small chunk of what you were overall doing, but now it's the only thing you're doing, or potentially going to be one of the only things you're doing. But again, I think it's, unless my co-panelists feel otherwise, I think it's something we would probably best be started having that conversation offline.
Great. Well, with that, we have come to the end of our hour for our first Reach Out Live. I want to thank each of our panelists so very much for giving up your time to do this, and for responding so quickly. With things changing every minute, every day, this sort of response I feel is vital. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody who is viewing. I would strongly encourage you, if you would like to be notified for the next Reach Out Live that we will be doing in May, please shoot me an email. My email is jpaine, that's P-A-I-N-E. It's jpaine@clemetrobar.org. Shoot me an email. We will make sure that you get on the list. We do also have some capacity if there is an urgent legal issue that you need help with over the next couple of weeks or next couple of months that you're looking at. Reach Out does also handle applications for pro bono legal help and advice. You can email that same email. Again, that's jpaine@clemetrobar.org, and we will get you hooked up with an application for pro bono help from our Reach Out crew. Thank you everybody for attending. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you again next time. Thanks everybody.